probably think doctors are people who save lives, but back in the day, they were often the first to legally send you to meet your ancestors. 1. Medical tools. Rust was a sign of professionalism. Welcome to the wonderful world of ancient medicine, where going to the doctor could easily be a one-way trip. Before Pasteur showed the world that tiny invisible monsters called bacteria existed, doctors had zero clue what germs were. To them, infection wasn't about hygiene, it was just bad luck. So when a surgeon picked up his favourite scalpel, it was probably the same one he'd used on 5 other people that week, still covered in dried blood, pus, and maybe a small piece of yesterday's intestine, but no problem, he'd wipe it on his coat. The same coat he'd been wearing for 10 years. That coat was his pride and joy. The darker, bloodier, and smellier it looked, the more experienced he appeared. It was basically the LinkedIn badge of 18th century surgery. Imagine walking into an operating room and your doctor greets you like, "Don't worry, I've done this hundreds of times," while holding a knife that looks like it survived the Black Plague. Sterilization. Never heard of it. Boiling instruments. What are you? A chef. They believed if a patient died, it wasn't because of the rusty tools or the bacteria party on the blade. No. It was clearly the patient's weak spirit. Poor man, they'd say. His constitution just couldn't handle a little amputation. Meanwhile, the real cause of death was the surgeon's lucky knife, which probably had more DNA on it than a modern crime lab. And don't forget the audience. Yes, back then, surgeries were public performances. People would gather around, watching the doctor slice someone open in a room with no gloves, no mask, and no anesthesia. It was like a horror movie meets a cooking show. The surgeon would saw through a leg in 30 seconds flat, wiping sweat, and sometimes blood, off his brow and proudly declare, "Success! Another life saved." 10 minutes later, the patient would die of infection, and the surgeon would shrug, "Well, I guess God didn't want him to live." It's funny to think that the deadliest thing in the 18th century hospital wasn't the disease, it was the doctor's favourite knife. Too bad blood. A theory doomed from the start. Back in the Middle Ages, people had no idea what bacteria or cells were, but they were very confident that all diseases came from bad blood. They believed your body was ruled by 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you were healthy, it meant the 4 guys were living in harmony. But if you got sick, it meant they were fighting inside you. The cure, easy. Drain some blood to restore internal peace. Imagine this. You go to a doctor and say, "Hey doc, I've got a headache." He nods wisely and says, "Ah yes, you've got too much blood, let me fix that." He pulls out a razor blade, or even better, a handful of leeches. Yes, actual leeches. He sticks them on your arm until you start turning pale. If you whisper, "Doctor, I feel dizzy," he smiles proudly and says, "Excellent, that means it's working." Sometimes patients fainted, and the doctor would go, "Perfect, the sickness has left the body." 5 minutes later, the patient really recovered, because there was no blood left to be sick. They didn't call it death by blood loss. They called it a treatment that almost succeeded. 3. Phlebotomy. Bloodletting for everything. If you think taking painkillers is bad, try being bled by a medieval doctor. From headaches to heart disease, bloodletting was the ultimate cure-all. It was the one-size-fits-all treatment for over 1,000 years. Doctors had fancy tools for it. Knives, cups, and yes, even more leeches. If you didn't get better, they'd just say, "You still have too much blood left." Thousands of people didn't die from illness. They died from overly enthusiastic doctors. Even George Washington, the first US president, wasn't safe. He got a mild sore throat, nothing serious. But his doctors went full medieval mode. They drained over 2 litres of blood from him in 24 hours. You can guess what happened next. Washington went from fever to forever. The doctors proudly announced, "We successfully removed all the bad blood." And yes, they really did remove all of it. Phlebotomy stayed popular well into the 19th century. Because tradition. And like most terrible traditions, it only ended when enough people died trying it. For poison. As medicine, brought to you by ignorance. Who needs vitamins when you have lead, mercury, and arsenic? Welcome to the glorious age where the more toxic, the more healing. In 16th century Europe, doctors believed shiny metals had cosmic powers. They'd grind them up, mix them with wine, and say, "Drink up, you'll feel radiant." Which was technically true. Your face did start glowing. Right before death. When patients began trembling, vomiting, or losing teeth, doctors would say, "Excellent, the poison is leaving your body." One of the most popular miracle drugs was calomel, a mercury compound used on everyone from crying babies to noblemen with tummy aches. The results? Bleeding gums, rotting jaws, and total nerve damage. But hey, people thought they were getting better. Meanwhile, in ancient China, emperors were drinking liquid mercury as an elixir of immortality. And in a way, they did live forever, just not physically. More like in the history books. Those doctors could proudly say, "My patients no longer suffer." And that's true, because they're no longer alive. They vervim. Mercury. The miracle that killed you slowly. If you lived in the 17th century and caught syphilis, your doctor would smile and say, "Congratulations, you're in luck. We have the perfect cure, mercury." That's right. The same toxic metal we now use in thermometers was once considered holy medicine. Doctors would smear it on your skin, inject it into your muscles, and even make you inhale mercury vapor like it was a spa treatment. Patients would sit there, wrapped in blankets, sweating, shaking and drooling. And the doctor would proudly say, "Excellent, the poison is leaving the body." In reality, the only thing leaving the body was your ability to stay alive. Your gums started bleeding, your teeth fell out, your hair came off in clumps, and your brain slowly melted from the inside. Still, the doctors insisted, "Look, he's trembling. That means it's working." After a few weeks of this treatment, your syphilis would indeed stop bothering you, because you'd be dead. Some doctors even had a saying, "One night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury," which sounds romantic until you realise Venus gave you syphilis and Mercury gave you an early funeral. And it didn't stop there. Mercury was used for everything, from skin creams to baby medicine. Yes, they rubbed this shiny death metal on newborns, because if it sparkled, it had to be good for you. By the 1800s, people started noticing a pattern. Everyone cured by mercury ended up with tremors, insanity, or a coffin. But instead of questioning the cure, doctors doubled down. Clearly, they said, "You didn't take enough mercury." The line between medicine and murder was thinner than your average thermometer. 6. Surgery without anesthesia. When pain was part of the process. Before anesthesia was discovered, surgery wasn't a medical procedure, it was a public endurance challenge. Imagine lying on a wooden table, wide awake, while a man with a rusty saw says, "Try to stay still, this will only hurt for a minute." That minute felt like eternity. Patients screamed, fainted, or tried to fight back, and sometimes were literally held down by assistants like they were catching a wild animal. Hospitals back then sounded less like medical centres and more like torture chambers. If you walked past one, you'd hear the unmistakable soundtrack of healthcare, sawing, yelling, and the occasional thud when someone passed out. Since there was no way to stop the pain, doctors competed to be the fastest. Speed meant skill. If you could cut off a leg in under a minute, you were basically a rock star. And the biggest name of them all was Robert Liston, the fastest knife in the West End. He was so quick he could amputate a leg in 30 seconds flat. Crowds came just to watch him, because nothing says fun afternoon like watching someone lose a limb. But one day during his legendary record-breaking operation, he swung his saw a little too enthusiastically. He sliced off his assistant's fingers and accidentally cut into a spectator's coat, which unfortunately had a man inside. All three, the patient, the assistant, and the poor bystander, later died of infection. Congratulations, Dr. Liston, the only man in history to achieve a 300% mortality rate in a single surgery. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was considered medical excellence. The invention of anaesthesia in the mid-1800s finally ended this madness. But until then, surgery wasn't about healing, it was about surviving the doctor. 7 unsanitized tools, when cleanliness was optional. Before people discovered germs, doctors reused everything. Scalpels, scissors, needles, all proudly unwashed and recycled between patients. After each operation, the tools would be dripping with blood and pus, and instead of cleaning them, the doctor would just wipe them on his apron, give a little shrug and say, good as new. To them, the idea that invisible creatures cause disease was pure fantasy. If a patient died after surgery, they didn't blame infection. They blamed bad luck or a weak constitution. Imagine sitting on the operating table, and the surgeon pulls out a sore that looks like it's been through a war, still shiny with yesterday's patient. Then he says, "Don't worry, this one worked great on the last guy." Spoiler, the last guy didn't make it either. Hospitals were basically petri dishes with beds. If you didn't arrive with an infection, you'd definitely leave with one. Wounds that should have healed turned black, patients got gangrene, and the smell of rotting flesh filled the air. The doctors themselves often had open wounds on their hands. No gloves, no washing. So every handshake was basically a bacterial exchange program. It wasn't until the mid-1800s that one man, Joseph Lister, suggested maybe, just maybe, cleaning tools and washing hands could save lives. People laughed at him. "Wash your hands! What are you, a maid?" Yet when his patients stopped dying, suddenly hygiene became fashionable. Who knew? Not being covered in pus was actually healthy. 8. Opium, the sweet relief that killed you. If you had pain in the 1800s, your doctor's answer was simple: opium. Toothache, opium. Cough, opium. Baby won't stop crying. Give that kid some opium. It was the original miracle cure. Just one spoonful could make you forget all your problems, mainly because you'd forget how to breathe. Pharmacists sold opium syrup called Godfrey's Cordial and Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup for children. Yes, literal narcotics for babies. The ad said it calms fussy infants. And they were right. It calmed them permanently. Adults weren't spared either. Opium pills, tinctures, powders. It was everywhere. People got addicted without even realizing it, because no one thought medicine could be dangerous. The logic was simple. If it makes the pain go away, it must be good. Never mind that it also made your heartbeat go away. By the 19th century, the world was full of happy, pain-free people who were slowly dying in slow motion. And when withdrawal kicked in, doctors prescribed more opium, a perfect business model. You couldn't spell relief without RIP. 9 medicine meets magic. When demons were the diagnosis. Back in the Middle Ages, most doctors weren't scientists. They were priests, fortune tellers, or amateur exorcists. Illness wasn't caused by germs or diet. Oh no, it was the work of evil spirits. Got a fever? Clearly a demon is sitting on your chest. Feeling depressed? You've been cursed by a jealous neighbour. To cure it, they'd perform holy rituals, chanting prayers, burning herbs, waving crosses, and occasionally hitting you with a stick to scare the demon out. If you didn't get better, it wasn't the doctor's fault. It was your soul's weakness. You lacked faith, my child. Some healers sold magical amulets filled with dirt, hair, or, let's just say, mysterious ingredients. Others prescribed bizarre treatments, like drinking boiled frog water or sleeping next to a dead cat for energy balance. One medieval cure for madness was to drill a hole in your skull to let the bad spirits escape, and people lined up for it. The combination of religion, superstition, and blind confidence turned medicine into a mix of miracle and murder. If you survived, divine blessing. If you didn't, God's will. Either way, the doctor always won. Hospitals. Where you went to die. If you think old hospitals were places of healing, think again. Most were filthy, overcrowded, and terrifying. The smell hit you before you even walked in. A mix of blood, mould, urine, and despair. Beds were shared by multiple patients. Sometimes one alive, one half dead. Sheets were never washed. Flies buzzed around open wounds. Rats ran across the floor like they owned the place. Doctors moved from one patient to another without washing hands or tools, spreading infection faster than the plague itself. Surviving a hospital visit was considered a miracle. People often preferred to stay home and take their chances, because statistically, home had a higher survival rate. Some hospitals were so bad they doubled as morgues. The dead and the dying were kept in the same rooms because, hey, they were going to the same place anyway. Visitors described them as pits of death, where screams echoed through the halls and the stench of decay was impossible to ignore. By the time modern sanitation arrived, hospital had already become a scary word. You didn't go there to get better. You went there to meet your maker. So yeah, Seeing a doctor in the old days was basically a game of guess your cause of death. On one side you had the disease, and on the other the doctor, who might actually be more dangerous. If you're watching this video comfortably at home, with clean hospitals, real medicine, and doctors who actually wash their hands, congratulations, my friend. You're one of the lucky survivors of modern civilization. Today we have anesthesia, antibiotics, and vaccines. Back then, if you sneezed once, your doctor was ready to drain half your blood for balance. So next time you complain about waiting too long at the hospital, just remember, at least your doctor isn't wearing a magic amulet, holding a rusty knife, and feeding you mercury smoothies. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this dive into historical madness, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because history's full of deadly funny stories like this.